Hello. Today we're continuing with this series of What Would Jesus Do? And we're going to focus on in current culture. What do you think Jesus would do today? I would like you to just take a few moments. If you're by yourself, just think about it. If you're in a group, you can sit and discuss and explore. What do you think Jesus would do if he just turned up right now? Take your time. When you're ready, press play again and I'll continue with you. So imagine it's quite likely you might have explored him doing similar things to what he did before. And we know then he broke a lot of social norms and rules, religious norms and rules, and he confronted injustice. He challenged a lot. He advocated for the marginalized. He welcomed outcasts and elevated women, and he actively dismantled the hierarchy of the society. He mixed with a wide variety of people. He healed. He connected. He was in conversation with a lot of people. We'd call it preaching. I imagine a number of those things came up in your conversation. What we're going to focus on today is how that relates to us and us in current culture and as Christians in current culture. So on this topic, I've been aware of this for a while, but I guess it really struck me that I was certainly lied to when I was younger. And I wonder if any of you guys have been lied to as well. Now, I guess lie is quite a strong word, isn't it? So the thing is, told things that weren't true, maybe told things that weren't true as absolute truths. So I'll elaborate on that more and get you to explore that more as we move forward. But first of all, I'd like us to look at one of the key verses, which is often referred to when we're looking at how we should be in current culture, and that is in Romans. So if we go to Romans 12:2, put the verses up on the screen as well. And this was a letter that Paul wrote to Christians in Rome at the time. And it says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." And if it's okay, I am going to also go through a more literal translation. The details will be on the screen. And it says this: "And do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind, for you to discern what is the good and well-pleasing and perfect will of God." Right, I'd like us to start off by just focusing on the beginning part of verse 2, the up to transformed by the renewing of the mind. Now, I had this verse quite a lot when I was younger. I imagine a number of you might have done too if you've grown up around Christianity. And one of the things I'd like us to start off with doing is look at the sort of context of the time, the context it was written in. So as I was saying, that Paul wrote it in a letter to Christians in Rome, and this is back in the 1st century. So what was Rome like back then? You've probably watched some of the old epic films which show parts of Rome during the Roman Empire. You might have seen the film Gladiator, and that's set in around the 2nd century. So you might have an idea of some of the things that went on. You might be aware that there was quite a lot of violence, and that was quite a culturally acceptable thing that was seen as entertainment. So you had slavery, a big wealth gap between the rich and the poor. There's a lot of oppression and inequality, strict hierarchies, and a very, very patriarchal society. They're quite strong gender roles, with free men being the dominant ones. And this is something you might not have seen so much in films or things you've been around, but abuse was acceptable, condoned as part of life, unless it was to a free man. But it was almost woven into their sort of legal, social sort of fabric. And sexual abuse as well was very common and seen as acceptable. in certain circumstances, including sexual abuse of minors as well, was normalised. So there are a lot of troubling things going on in that society. And you can understand why Paul is saying, do not be conformed to this age. Do not be conformed to this world. I'd like us to just have a quick look at the different words, the Greek ones, and then don't worry, I'm not going to try and pronounce them because I will massively struggle. But just to enhance our understanding of what's being said here. So when conformed is being used, like I said, I'm not going to try and pronounce the Greek word. It is talking about to conform or to fashion, okay? And the world, like the literal translation, I read it as an age. So an age or a world is how you'd understand that Greek word. The renewing is renewing, and a renewal, a change of heart and life, which I found particularly helpful into that because it really is giving that more detail or more very sort of specific about what that that renewing is going on. To be transformed is literally, you recognize that with the Greek word, and literally to transform. And then mind is talking about the intellect, the mind. Perfect. So we're moving on to the parts of the verse. The Greek word, the sort of translation of that is complete or completeness. I don't know about you, but that really helped me. I guess perfect, we have associations, don't we, the words we use, but just to think it talking about complete and completeness, I'm like, that makes sense. And will, so an act of will, wishes or desires. So just expanding on those verses on what is being meant in this letter to the Christians in Rome at the time. So most struck me just exploring the things that were going on in Rome, in the Roman Empire at that time, is parallels with now, and understanding the troubling things that were going on in the culture at the time in this first century. It totally makes sense that Paul be saying, don't conform to this. However, now we have some very prominent people identifying as Christians, and not so prominent, but still identifying as Christians, celebrating war, protecting sexual abusers, including of minors, actively working against equality. There's multiple attacks on the queer community, supporting hierarchies and widening the wealth gap, and encouraging control and dominance. And it makes you wonder, how did we get here when we have the example of Jesus, and Jesus said the most important commandments are summed up with loving God and loving each other as yourself. We have, with this from Paul, this whole thing of not being conformed to the world, not doing as the world does or this age does, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind. So how have we gotten here? And is that how you should be behaving if you're following what did Jesus do in our current culture? So I'm going to go through now what I said earlier. I was lied to. I wondered if any of you guys were too, or if any of this resonates with you, or maybe it's just something you've heard a bit about or you've got certain vibes from. But I was very much encouraged as a young person growing up in a church context. And this came from some different church leaders, not saying this was a constant thing from the pulpit, but some different church leaders, different youth workers, youth leaders we'd involved with. Obviously, there was also an influence coming in, American influence as well. But basically, we were very strongly encouraged to not be conformed to this world, not to be conformed to this age, and to do that by being very separate. There was an emphasis on being set apart, prioritizing Christian relationships, Christian friends, and being careful of having non-Christian friends. But it was also okay if you were basically trying to convert them and mixing with people in that context, but otherwise be very careful. There was a lot of fear involved. Well, purity culture was a big thing when I was younger, and there's a lot of the messages within that. And I guess like anything, you can say, well, this part was good, this part is bad of a lot of things. And you can take, there's some elements of purity culture, be, well, that's kind of positive to people to feel like there wasn't any pressure on them to have sex, or to encouraging people to be pure in a healthy way. But unfortunately, this is a movement, a very large one, which brought about a lot of unhealthy sort of dynamics. And so, although a big part of purity culture is to focus on sex, not having sex, it kind of ended up, that focus ended up focusing minds on sex quite a lot, and hypersexualizing males and females, putting a lot of the burden of that on females as well. Being careful not to make your brother sin, be careful how you're dressing, because of all these other things. And this whole thing of keeping yourself pure and holy, this whole sort of set apart and not letting yourself be contaminated by the world. There was a lot of messaging around that. And so it encouraged this sort of separating yourself. But fear was a big part of that. And the doctrine of hell is all linked in with that as well. And there's a lot of fear of wanting to mess up. So I'm aware of a lot of negative things that came in with this, not conforming to this age. But also, rather than maybe, let's say, we're looking at the patterns just explained, the things that were going on in within the Roman Empire in the first century. They're talking about the things which are harming people, which are hurting people, which is not loving people. Whereas what I experienced was big focus more on superficial surface level things, like the music you were listening to, the things you were doing, the places you were going, the people you were hanging out with, or spending your time with. Much more focused on these sort of surface level things than the deeper things. Also, because this was all linked in with a certain interpretation of the Bible, there was a lot of caution around actually other groups of Christians as well. I can remember being told other Christians weren't really Christians because they didn't believe the exact same things that the church I was in at the time, and the messaging I was getting from these groups. They don't believe the exact same thing, so therefore they're not sort of true believers or true Christians. I'm very cautious of, let's say, things like feminism and moves towards equality, because it's being represented as, well, this is God's way. There's like these traditional gender roles, and this, this is the better way, and moving towards equality and things like that. That's the ways of the world, and you need to stay away from that. I wish I had more time because I have so much to say on this front. One thing I can say is, if you are interested in finding out a bit more about roles of women and gender roles, and also how we've gotten to places we have in some denominations and areas, The Making of Biblical Womanhood: How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth, by Dr. Beth Allison Barr. And she also can go into details about the history. She's actually a pastor's wife as well as a historian, a scholar, and about the biases in translations. For example, around times of women's suffrage, or Junia being translated as Junius because the translators didn't think a woman could be an apostle, or Phoebe, a deacon or minister, she being translated that she was a helper because, again, translators, it didn't fit with their ideology. But this particular interpretation had a big impact on a lot of people. But again, it was being put forward as in, this is God's way, this is a Christian way. And the world, you've got to be really careful of the world. It's out there, and there's a lot to fear, and you've got to be really careful. And yeah, they have a different plan, and that's not godly. Also, the exclusion of the queer community and the attacks on the queer community and their rights coming from people who identify as Christians It's very much linked into mistranslation and misinterpretation in the Bible. I wish I had more time to talk to you about this now, and I think it's important and something to look at moving forward. But for example, in 1946, the word homosexual first appeared in the Bible, it's RSV version, and after it was issued, the problem with the translation was raised, and the head of the translation committee agreed it was a mistranslation, but they couldn't do anything at that point, so they had like a 10-year freeze before changes could happen. And I think it was 1971 before they had the new version of the RSV, and they obviously changed that word, but by that point the damage had been done, people's understanding had been impacted. There are also other areas where, again, there's been a sort of similar sort of translation and idea, when actually the original context and what's been talked about was abuse and predatory behaviour. Consensual same-sex relationships aren't covered there, but those translations, that understanding has been picked up and pasted on top of that, and it's formed people's opinions, and there's been lots of consequences coming from that. These misinterpretations, mistranslations have fueled the fire for excluding, again, for attacking, but also for Christians to be told, if you're accepting or queer affirming, then you are conforming to the patterns of this world. You're conforming to the world. You're not conforming to God or the Bible. I have people close to me in same-sex relationships who have suffered great rejection from Christians and really tough things, and those Christians have believed that they are following God and they're following that instruction to not conform to the world. And it's so sad, but I can totally understand how we have gotten to this place where people identifying as Christian are championing so many harmful things, so many unloving things. I'd like you to take a moment now, just whether if you're by yourself, just sit and think. If you're in a group, you can have a chat. We've all come from different backgrounds and different experiences. And maybe mine is quite strange. Maybe a number of you can relate to it. It would be great if you just take a bit of time. I'll put some questions on the screen. And then again, when you're ready, please press play and I will finish up with you. So how should we engage with the culture? Biblical text is time-bound by the culture from back then, but our sense of like the Holy Spirit of God, that's continuous. And that is what these verses in Romans are saying. This is what this letter to those Christians in Rome was saying. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, for you to discern what is the good and well-pleasing and perfect will of God. We have the Holy Spirit in us, and we should be seeking the Holy Spirit to guide us. We should be seeking for God to lead us and to guide us. A number of us, and this is for another time, if you've particularly grown up, but in certain areas of Christianity, might have been encouraged not to trust our guts, not to trust our intuition. Often those verses from Jeremiah come in about the heart is deceitful, etc., etc. And again, I wish I had more time, but that is taken totally out of context. But we are created in God's image. We have the Holy Spirit in us, and God gave us our gut instincts and our intuition. And we have the example of Jesus and what Jesus did when he was in the culture he was born into. I would encourage everyone to take time to reflect on the messages they've received, maybe foundational truth they've had about the world, the age, and being careful not to conform to it. And challenge those things. Challenging things can be quite tricky. So sometimes just doing bite-sized chunks might be quite a good idea. Just focus on a small thing or one thing at a time. But I'd encourage you not to fear, and I encourage you to be really open and seek God's guidance. You can take time now to reflect on those things, maybe discuss them in a group if it is appropriate to do that. I'll leave some questions up on the screen and you can finish when you're ready, and I will say bye for now and thank you for listening. I hope you have a good week.